Theme 4: Culture and Society. This theme focuses on the roles that ideas, beliefs, social mores, and creative expression have played in shaping the United States, as well as how various identities, cultures, and values have preserved or changed in different contexts of U.S. history. Period 1 continuities include Native resistance against European encroachment through military resistance. Examples include the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, where natives rose up and tried to get rid of anything European. These resistance continued throughout future periods. Examples include the 1830 Indian Removal Act and the Seminole Wars, where the U.S. tried to attack the Seminoles for decades and were never defeated. Natives sought religious autonomy through resistance.
Puritans from the Anglican Church of Catholic Rituals and separatists traveled to the New World to seek religious asylum from oppression in the Old World. This wave of pilgrims seeking freedom and opportunity continues into the Great Migration in 1916, where 6 million African Americans migrated north seeking freedom from racial oppression and the racist culture surrounding the South.
Changes include how natives and Europeans adapted useful aspects of each other's cultures, such as technology with the use of guns and agricultural techniques, which allowed for Europeans to grow new crops, which had a dramatic effect on their diet. Prior to this period, neither natives or Europeans were exposed to these useful aspects, which helped expand each other's cultures and their way of living.
A change in religious beliefs occurred during the Columbian era, in which Native Americans, forced into assimilation by the Spanish, abandoned their animistic beliefs, the beliefs that non-human things possess a spiritual essence, and then converted into Catholic and Protestant way of faith. This belief rejected atomism and brought upon the worship of human figures such as saints.
Continuities include minorities such as Africans who sought to maintain some type of autonomy of family, culture, and religion through resistance to slavery, as in the Stoner Rebellion of 1739, in which slaves revolted and killed many whites and tried to flee to Florida.
William Penn and his Quakers in Pennsylvania adopted a religious toleration point of view amongst other passive beliefs. The Maryland Toleration Act of 1649 was one of the first legal documents of the colonies demanding free exercise and religious tolerance of mainly Catholicism and Christianity. The development of accepting others' beliefs continues into the Bill of Rights of James Madison's and into the First Amendment of Thomas Jefferson, which implemented free exercise and rejected a religion of the state into the law of the land. Bacon's rebellion in 1676 was a change in racial oppression of the Native Americans to the persecution of African American slaves. The result of this rebellion separated the indentured servants, mainly white, from the black slaves in order to reduce the risk of any uprisings. Eventually, this separation led to the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705, which further restricted interactions amongst races and most likely set in motion centuries of racist ideology in the United States.
Colonial resistance against Britain can be seen as a change because it stemmed from the ideas of liberty, because colonists saw themselves as British and wanted the same rights.
Pontiac's rebellion was an Indian uprising after the French and Indian War, led by an Ottawa chief named Pontiac. They opposed British expansion into the western Ohio Valley and began destroying British forts in the area. The continued resistance of the tribes continued into the Chief Little Turtles formation of the Western Confederacy in 1783 after the Treaty of Paris. This united tribes against the impending arrival of white settlers. However, the Confederacy fell apart after the Battle of Fallen Timber in 1794, resulting in United States control over territories beyond the Appalachian Mountains until the Mississippi River.
Inequalities in society continue to be on the rise during the second half of the 18th century, which eventually led to the change of these inequalities because it brought awareness and the abolition of slavery, with the example of Pennsylvania Gradual Emancipation Law of 1780, where it prohibited the importation of slaves in Pennsylvania. It was the first to gradually abolish slavery because the economy was now based on slaves.
The idea of Republican motherhood emerged after the American Revolution. This idea reinforced a woman's role in society as a pillar of the domestic sphere. Their job, in the eyes of men, was to raise good citizens and uphold their moral values. However, this idea changed in 1889 with Jane Addams and her Chicago Hull Houses. Jane Addams provided settlement houses to provide social services to immigrants, such as housing, food, and job training. Jane Addams' service to the community demonstrated a woman's ability to dominate beyond the household.
The idea that women should achieve greater equality during this period can be seen through the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848. It was a women's rights convention where women joined each other, and even a few men, to propose more rights to women. Just as Abigail Adams' idea that women should be protected and treated appropriately, not exactly equal, but respected.
The American Temperance Society of 1826, a society in which members were to abstain from any distilled beverages such as alcohol, continued its ideology into the Prohibition movement and the 18th Amendment. Both movements advocated for the mandatory prohibition of alcohol. Both movements were backed by women.
Changes include the 1830s Transcendentalist movement, which encouraged society to have communication with God and nature. An example includes Henry David Thoreau, who wrote The Civil Disobedience, in which he argued that it was a man's duty to refuse to support the government if it would not improve itself.
Emerging movements of cultural nationalism led to patriotic themes of arts and new religious beliefs. For example, the Hudson River School praised the beauty of art through their paintings. Another example would be John James Audubon, a scientist that discovered 29 new species of birds and observed them. The Mormons, founded by Joseph Smith, fled to Utah due to religious persecution. The Shakers, which believe in sexual equality and celibacy, were also exempt from society. The rise of xenophobia and nativism in the United States emerged as the Know Nothing Party in the late 1840s. This party ran on anti-Catholic, anti-immigration beliefs. This ideology can be seen in The Birth of a Nation in 1915. The Birth of a Nation can be directly responsible for the rise of the Second Ku Klux Klan. Both were a clear representation of a radical conservative ideology.
Immigrants preserving their own culture by settling in ethnic communities like Little Italy and Chinatown, like we see today, is a continuation of how African Americans would preserve their culture by developing slave music, which developed a sense of community and brought hope to them. It was also an act of resistance.
The Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment introduced rights formerly unknown to the newly freed slaves, and also introduced an era of Reconstruction. This era gave way to political opportunity for former slaves. This can be seen through Hiram Revels. He was the first black elected member of Congress.
Immigration from Europe and Asia began to emerge in this period with Irish, who settled in cities in the Northeast, Germans who settled on the frontier and worked as farmers in the Midwest, and the Chinese who settled on the West Coast in the 1850s and worked in gold mines, factories, and farming. The Reconstruction era of 1863 to 1877 can be seen as a turning point because it led to debates regarding African Americans, women, and other minorities. The ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery everywhere in the U.S., the 14th Amendment, which granted African American citizenship and equal protection under the laws, and the 15th Amendment, which protected the right to vote for black men, paved the way for women's suffrage with the 19th Amendment, which was ratified on August 18, 1920. It also opened doors for civil rights movements that sparked boycotts and nonviolent protests. Examples include Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat in the bus to a white passenger. Her refusal helped spark the Montgomery bus boycott, which was a protest against the racial segregation on public transit systems of Montgomery, Alabama. This drew national attention. The Civil Rights Act of 1968 was then put in place, ending segregation and the idea of separate but equal. Sioux Wars 1876 to 1877, Ghost Dance Movement, and Massacre of Wounded Knee. Responding to Indian resistance with military force continues throughout this unit. It begins with the Sioux Wars, in which Native Americans were forced onto reservations when gold was found in their lands. Having lived there peacefully for many years, this infuriated the tribes. Decades later, Wovoka began the ghost dance, which he thought would make the white people disappear. This led to fear of an uprising and led to a massacre of Native Americans just dancing. William Granham and John D. Rockefeller justified their wealth as God's will. God gave me my money. Slave owner Slave owners used religion to justify slavery, seen to control the sinful, less human race. A continuity is seen in the far right, where men of power justify their good fortunes using religion. First, with the slave owner whom saw themselves as carrying out God's will. Then, in this unit, used by millionaires to perceive themselves as superior to all others because God made it that way. Changes include Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Although racial discrimination is seen through U.S. history, this change introduced a new way of oppressing black people. Segregation certified as legal mode of society to separate whites and blacks in all aspects of life, including education, transportation, etc. Consumer culture. The growing middle class in urban areas developed a consumer culture in cities that promoted department stores, advertisements, and many more ways to get the product to the customer. The latest fashion were available to all, and shopping became the latest hobby. Due to the prosperity of many corporations, these items were produced at a massive rate. Nativism continues to rise in the 1920s through the white expansion of the second KKK. They advocated white supremacy, white nationalism, and nativism. Their mission was to keep America American. They tried to portray themselves as patriotic. Awareness of the necessity to preserve the environment is introduced in political body, starting with Teddy Roosevelt, whom supported and added new national parks with the 1906 American Antiquities Act, as well as John Muir and his activism to help conserve the Yosemite Valley. These actions to protect the environment take the form of the Clean Air Act of 1970 and the Clean Water Act of 1977. Both instances of further preventing human damage to our natural resources. Changes. Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Restriction on immigration due to the immense xenophobia and nativism constituents. The act banned on Chinese immigration and their naturalization, making it illegal to travel to the U.S. from China and become a citizen. This act was the beginning of immigration restriction. The immigration quota is enacted only 3 decades later. New mass media help spread culture and awareness of regional cultures. Examples include the radio. It was a large source of entertainment. And with fireside chats during the Depression, FDR spoke directly to American people and helped put them at ease by letting them know what the country was doing. The Beat Generation 1950s is a literary movement started by a group of authors whose work explored and influenced American culture and politics in the post-World War II era. The central idea of beat culture are rejections of traditional values, spiritual quests, and exploration of American and Eastern religions, rejection of materialism, explicit portrayals of the human condition, experimentation with psychedelic drugs, and sexual liberation. Another rebellious form of literature that stood against the currents of societal ideology was the Lost Generation, writers that revealed the true nature of the shallow lives of the young and independently wealthy in the aftermath of the war. This is seen in James Gatsby and Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Much like the Beat Generation, they promoted nonconformist and unpopular elevations of society. Brown versus the Board of Education 1955 reserved the decision of Plessy versus Ferguson, in which segregation was allowed as long as it was equal. However, this jury ruled that separation is inherently unequal due to inferiority complexes many students face. The elimination of racial boundaries and moving towards equal rights was also seen in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that outlawed any discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Both instances removed racial barriers and promoted black equal rights. Changes include the relegation of the gay community into the public eye. The Stonewall Rebellion of 1969 gave birth of all the gay rights movements. A community kept in the dark and once revealed was challenged by the evangelical Christians as well as conservatives. The counterculture most popular in the 1970s were the hippies. This change of culture brought upon liberal ideas as they challenged their parents' generation's belief. This culture promoted drug use and instituted a sexual revolution. A continuity during this period can be seen in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. It was the United States Supreme Court case in which the constitutionality of several Pennsylvania state statutory provisions regarding abortion was challenged. It is a continuation of Roe v. Wade, which ultimately legalized abortion. September 11, 2001 can be a continuity from the bombing of Pearl Harbor. They both increased patriotism. Changes included evangelical and fundamental Christian Billy Graham, born again. Personal liberty versus national security. Edward Snowden. People don't trust the government. Thank you for watching and I hope you pass your Apush exam.